Hey guys, Adam here from BoLS, and I'm here at FFG's headquarters in Minnesota. I'm super pumped. I'm getting to speak with Max and Frank, two of the lead designers on X-Wing 2.0. Let's do it.
X-Wing is a Star Wars miniatures game of space battles at the starfighter level. It involves planning your maneuvers in advance while your opponent simultaneously plans their maneuvers, and you're trying to guess where you think they're going to go. You're going to make your own moves intelligently based on that, and then you reveal, you move your ships, and then you attack each other and blow each other up. That's X-Wing in a nutshell. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that. There's a pretty vibrant competitive scene where people get very, very into it, and so that's on our minds as well. But at the heart of it, it's a game about flying ships around, blowing each other up, trying not to run into rocks.
So we are going to relaunch X-Wing with X-Wing 2.0. We're going to come out with some conversion kits right away and some new ships.
Yeah, I mean, so the second edition of X-Wing is going to update a lot of things about the game. It is really focused on bringing the game back to the core elements of gameplay. Flying the ships, setting the dials, planning out, outfoxing your opponent. Everything is in service of focusing back in on that. So it'll be a great place for new players to jump in because, obviously everyone will be on the same playing field. It'll refresh a lot of the things that veterans enjoy about the game, and hopefully really excite and invigorate the community.
While making first edition, we found that it's very difficult to properly balance a game for the longevity that the game actually has. You can have numbers that are accurate for the time that they were created, but over time, as new content is added, it might be slightly underpowered, slightly overpowered, but from what previously existed. And over time, you develop a very hardened base of what's very good in the game. So an ability for us to be able to touch that at any time with the new squad builder, we'll be able to adjust point costs, upgrade bars, that sort of thing, in order to help competitively balance the game for a long foreseeable future.
On top of that, from the design side, there's another major factor at play here as well, which is that we're able to plan it all out from the start. So instead of, X-Wing was tremendously successful, has been tremendously successful, and when I jumped into it a few years into it, it was a fun game to work on, but there were a lot of design restrictions because there were places that we just sort of couldn't go because in the past we'd, set things up in a certain way, not thinking about the fact that we need to be designing things in a few years. And, that's just sort of the nature of the beast, but a second edition gives us the chance to really go back, take a look at our best ideas, and sort of refine all the things people have really liked, use all the feedback we've gotten from the fans and from playtesters and everyone, and really, integrate that into the game from the start instead of sort of having it, added on as it goes, which, is sort of necessary, but there's a lot of advantages to being able to go back, too. And so the second edition lets us do that, where we can actually say, okay, a great example of that is turrets. The original turret mechanic's not a bad mechanic, but it has some challenges. It introduces some issues in the game, and a few years into the game, we designed the mobile firing arc, and we sort of said, oh, this is a really great way to handle this. So when we go back in second edition, we're able to say, okay, can we make all turrets mobile firing arcs? And initially we were sort of like, I don't know if we can pull that off, and then we tested the components and it worked, and so that's the sort of thing we can do, is we can go back and take the best ideas and the things that worked best based on the experience we've accumulated and really, double down on those things and push that to sort of push the core experience of the game.
Yeah, as far as balance within a faction, that's another interesting point, that by having the long view of what we know exists in the game, we can make each of the ships involved more niche. You can say, oh, well, we know we're going to make this, so we can make this more specialized in this capacity. With the new movies especially, we didn't know what was going to be in the faction when we started it, So you have to design it in a kind of general capacity, but once we know what actual things are going to be there, we can kind of retune things, replace it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and with speaking of factions as well, we can really plan out our faction themes in a coherent way.
Yeah.
I mean, factions had themes in first edition, but a lot of the times you sort of had to work around the existing wrinkles or things that didn't necessarily quite line up. And now there's a lot more ability to really like hone in on those things. So, when we sat down to discuss second edition for the first time, one of the things we talked about was stronger faction themes and clearer sort of mechanics that map onto certain things. So it's not to say that factions won't occasionally, jump out of their circle if it's thematically appropriate or fun, but like Imperials tend to have a lot of abilities that reward you for flying in formation. They reward conformity of play, because the Empire is all about, that sort of like faceless, oppressive conformity. Howl Runner was one of the abilities from first edition where like, that's a really Imperial ability. You all fly together, you get a benefit, you want to protect this one important person sort of at the expense of everyone else. Whereas Rebels, we wanted to really give them the idea that they're like sort of a motley group working together, they're the underdogs, so they tend to have abilities where one character will help another, so it sort of evokes that moment where Han comes back and saves Luke, right? It's that, that sort of like heroic rescue moment. So Rebels tend to have abilities that play off of that.
Yeah, on a related note, Biggs Darklighter was obviously a huge factor in a lot of Rebel builds for a long time. And that effect is very powerful, and we wouldn't want to replicate it perfectly in second edition, but we can have other ships with abilities similar to it, including Biggs, that are able to kind of play off that synergy of, I've got your back. They're very much about like team loyalty and cooperation in that sort of capacity. So by getting another take at all of the abilities, we can have, especially the upgrades. I think we did a very strong job with that, where before it's like, what makes a crew member? How's it different than an astromech? What's a system do? And by actually getting another big, another take at it, seeing where the game has gone, what kind of abilities people like to play with, what are a little too good, or maybe are in the wrong position, we were able to kind of make more coherent themes in that regard. So a good example is with astromechs. Astromechs, we felt, thematically they do things like help repair your ship or recover your shields or something.
Help with navigation. Yeah.
Help with navigation. So we've kept those abilities around. But the other one is very much, you are flying the ship, your astromech is there to help you. So he's going to expand the capacities that you already have. So you're like, for example, a weapons engineer from first edition was like, you can have 2 target locks. That feels like a thing that an astromech could be able to do for you, because it's like, oh, you're in a target lock? I'll help you out. I'll target lock too.
So when you do the thing, you do it better.
Yeah.
Whereas with crew, we wanted them to feel more like, if you take the crew member, it's sort of another pilot ability.
Yeah, so it's doing something you just didn't even have access to do. It's just something else entirely. We also have the new gunner slot, which is used on some ships that have turrets or bombardiers or something like that. And they tend to focus more on dealing damage or something about helping with aiming your guns or that sort of thing.
Your weapon systems in general,
yeah.
Bombs, anything
right.
like that.
So having this ability to focus on the different slots actually contributing a very specific effect to your ship. So that I found was really nice to be able to do.
Definitely. There are also more faction-locked upgrades overall. There aren't a ton more, but it's definitely a space we're very conscious of, because we know that people like having sort of, hooks for the faction. They can sort of think of like, okay, I'm doing an Imperial build. How am I going to use Ruthlessness? So being able to think about that sort of thing and think about those like, coherent, sort of like iconic faction abilities, we wanted to really help drill that down, because we know it's Star Wars. Theme is important. What are the major changes to the core mechanics? Well, the big one, I would say, that like right out the gate has a huge impact on a lot of things, is that green maneuvers are now blue.
Okay, that's a very minor one, but yes, that is one that is a change to the game, mainly to help our colorblind friends able to enjoy X-Wing a lot easier. So yes, we made that transition. Another, I'd say a pretty fundamental change is the addition of linked actions. So
this is an actual big change.
This is an actual big change. Push Limit was like the most influential card the game had. The ability to do 2 things instead of 1 is surprisingly
Do
useful.
more things.
Do more things. So that open-ended nature of Push Limit is part of what made it a little too good. Your ability to do 2 things is great, and we liked it. Flying an interceptor where you can boost and then barrel, or barrel and boost, is fun, and that's a great play experience. We don't want to take that away. But its open-ended nature meant that on some ships it was just the best thing you could do, and other ships it was very strong still and hard to put other things in that slot.
And then there were some ships that were, the whole ship chassis was really weakened by the fact that they couldn't take it at all.
Yes.
So, you know, it was this sort of weird thing we had to really design around, and it was such a prevalent thing, but it was also important to the way the game functioned. So, to deal with that, we came up with linked actions.
Yep. So instead of it being as open-ended as Push Limit, there will be a specific action you can do after doing another action. So you could focus, and then maybe you barrel roll, maybe you don't. Obviously, having the ability just to do 2 actions, which was Darth Vader's ability in first edition, is very good. So we introduced another idea, which is red actions.
So many linked actions are red actions. So you'll have, focus, and then you'll have a red barrel roll option or something like that. So obviously red action, you take a stress to do it. It's like a red maneuver. You can't do it while stressed, but you can't do actions while stressed anyway. So it's not too big a loss. But that's one place that we're able to really add on a lot, because suddenly we can also, and red actions can just exist independently too. So the Y-Wing has red barrel roll, because we see Y-Wings barrel roll. They do it in Rebels, they do it in stuff, but
they're the right shape.
They're not good at it. It's not really, it's sort of a ship you have to coax to barrel roll. So, it's a hard thing to do. You're not going to want to do it often. But I remember one of the first games we put down on the table with that red barrel roll, I did it once or twice, and I was like, oh, that was a really nice option to have.
It feels really good to barrel a Y-Wing, which is why Expert Handling was really a card you wanted on that chassis.
And now Expert Handling, we can use the talent slot to have Expert Handling make you better at barrel rolling. So suddenly, you have to have barrel roll to take it, but if you have barrel roll, it makes your barrel roll a standard action instead of a red action. So you can do it, so you put that on a Y-Wing, now it's good at barrel rolling, and a good pilot can stand out from a less experienced pilot that way.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, red actions, successions. Another big one was the addition of medium ships.
Yeah. Yes,
so
medium-based ships.
Medium bases. So over the years we found there were some ships that were maybe like a little too small for the large base. Or a little too
the K-Wing, the ARC 170.
And then there's some that go the other direction, where they're a little too small for a large base.
IG,
like
Slave
2000,
1.
Slave 1, things like that. And so over time, especially with the Scum faction, as you just heard from the list, we really felt like we needed to do it. But it was, at a certain point, it was kind of past the point of having us done it. It'd be a little hard to implement, so...
It would be weird that there would be medium ships there were things that should have been medium ships, but then wouldn't be if we introduced it, so we never wanted to introduce it. But starting over gives us a chance to do that. So now we have medium-based ships.
So a clean sweep, all the medium-sized ships are medium bases. Large ships are large, small are small. So yeah, they're the length that you'd expect them to be. 1.5 small bases on each side.
It does make flying them really interesting. They are definitely different, but it's cool. They have a neat maneuver pattern.
Yeah.
They really do feel between a large and small, unsurprisingly.
Mm-hmm. They're a little harder to fly synced up, just because they're kind of taking half steps every once in a while. But at the same time, flying 2 mediums together is pretty normal.
The Force has obviously been a thing in X-Wing from the start. Luke Skywalker is right in the original core set, and obviously his ability reflects that he is able to use the Force. That it's that sort of instinctive defense that protects him. But we've been thinking about the way to do Force powers for a long time, and second edition was a chance to really introduce that in an interesting way. And one of the challenges, again, whenever we thought about introducing Force powers, was like, how would we do that? Like, there's nothing on Luke that tells you he's Force sensitive, so we wouldn't be able to make an upgrade. I guess it would have to be Luke only, but then what if Vader use it? So, getting the clean sweep, we can just add that from the start. So it is a stat essentially like the others that a ship can possess, and some crew can add it to ships as well. And it grants you a number of charges, one of which recurs each round. So Luke has 2, for instance, and he recurs 1 each round. You can spend it to modify your dice a little bit, kind of like a mini focus. And you can also use it for the pilot ability, usually. So Luke is a little bit of an exception. A lot of them have pilot abilities that are powered by the Force. Luke's pilot ability actually gives him Force points back more easily, because we wanted Luke to play a lot like he did in First Edition. Because we actually really like Luke's ability in First Edition. So Luke, when he's defending, he gets a Force point back. So he basically always has the ability to protect himself with the Force.
Darth Vader, on the other hand, has an ability where he can spend the Force in order to do bonus effects. Extra actions, much like his First Edition counterpart.
Yeah, and Vader has 3, because he's
Darth Vader.
Scariest Force user out there at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to that, instead of having talent upgrades, Force users have Force power upgrades. And some of the old talents have been sort of shifted into being, speaking of theme, Force powers tend to break the rules in various ways. They're sort of, shift the paradigm a little bit. So, what was Deadeye, which was pretty clearly themed as Luke using the Force to fire, without his targeting computer, is now spend a Force point to fire your ordnance without a target lock
requirement. Yeah, we've been able to expand into that field with using that as another resource that players would have to use. Instead of just having to spend an action or getting a stress or something like that, we have the added capacity to spend Force charges.
Speaking of resources, we have another type of charge, which are standard charges, which we probably should have led with.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's another big point, but yeah, it's a nice transition.
And standard charges are a stat that can exist on ships or upgrades, like Force charges, and they look fairly similar, though they're different shape and different color. And they represent a resource that can be depleted. Sometimes they recur, so like Force charges, you might be able to get 1 back per round on some abilities that we want to limit to once per round. Other things, though, like ordnance, you just have a set amount of it, and you can't get it back unless you have the reload action or something like that.
Yeah, so you can give multi-use bombs, multi-use ordnance, things like that, which in First Edition, it was hard to cost correctly, because it's like, well, you could it could be really effective, or it could do nothing, and so it was hard to get that right balance of, I felt like I paid enough points for it, I got something out of it. So having the ability to do it once, twice, 3 times is better than just only once or infinite, which is more or less what we had in the First Edition.
It also helps us make the reload action sort of a safer action to play around with, because you only reload 1 charge, so it's not an all or nothing proposition. And some things can't be reloaded. You can't cover the table in proximity mines,
for example. Yes. Yeah, so charges are a big deal. As you mentioned, the once per round abilities, which in First Edition you just had to remember you did it, or whatever. Here
people got pretty good at it, and they made their own tokens.
Yes, but here we actually have your ability to just do it, and so rather than saying once per round, you just say spend your charge to X.
So no more needing to have a special token for Palpatine, though. If you want one, you can probably still have a special token.
Yeah, you can probably figure it out.
Definitely. So there are a lot of changes. So another fairly fundamental change that helps with the sort of returning the focus to flying is that the bullseye arc, which was introduced with the Chemogilla, is now printed on all ship bases. Now, not every ship has an ability that interacts with it. It still doesn't, and it doesn't do anything intrinsically now. But a lot of upgrades interact with it. So a great example of this is Predator, the old favorite. Predator was too strong. But we like the idea of being able to have some kind of modification, but we want you to have to work for your dice mods, generally speaking, so they should interact with flying in some way. So with Predator, it only triggers if your target's in the bullseye now. So you can still get that reroll, but you need to fly in a specific manner to get it.
Mm-hmm. Another big fundamental change was instead of having turrets work in all directions, we went the direction of the Shadowcaster and a mobile firing arc. So now turret ships just have a turret arc indicator on them, and the ships that don't have a fixed fire and turret might just have the single or even a double turret. So things like the Falcon, which had a classically had a 360 turret, have basically a 180 turret. So they can either shoot left and right or forwards and backwards. So those ships also have the rotate action in order to do it, much like the Shadowcaster. So that actually helps play up the interplay between you and your opponent, because you have to dodge those arcs. Because now you can arc dodge a turret.
And you have to guess where they're going to be if you're flying that turret.
Right. Both sides are now having to focus more about, okay, I'm going to be here. I think he's going to be there. Do I rotate now or not? Or even if they've done that, now they have to work to try to get out of the arcs when playing the other direction. So yeah, that was a pretty fundamental change to make you focus on flying in arcs.
Yeah, and just generally speaking, if you look at the abilities on upgrade cards, many of them relate to position. There are a lot of upgrade cards that are like, oh, you get a bonus if, you know, like the opponent is here compared to you, or, you know, like you can do something if there's an enemy ship, you know, nearby or something like that. So we've really tried to focus on like position on the table matters. And, you know, there are still some upgrades that, you know, like can give you, you know, more general bonuses, but they tend to be very expensive. And most of the time, we really wanted to push the idea that, like, if you are getting a benefit, you don't just pay points for a benefit, you also have to fly your ship in a certain way to get it most of the time.
Unrelated note, although we have the bullseye printed on all the ship tokens, we also have rear arcs printed on there as well. So they're not shaded in if they're not firing arcs, but they allow us to play with the different arcs. So you could say if someone is in your rear arc, because now every ship has a rear arc, certain effects happen. We also have hashed lines on the sides, so you can say in front of or behind or flanking if you're perfectly parallel with them.
Those also let us do something, speaking of flying the ships and playing up positioning, the revisions to barrel roll.
Yes. So used to be you had more technically infinite positioning, because you can go anywhere along the side, anywhere along the side. So you have a pretty wide place to go, but we felt that this gave ships with barrel a very, very potent repositioning ability. So to make that a little less good, along with we didn't mention that yet. The templates have lines down the middle, which you can use for resolving collisions you can back up along. So the one-speed maneuver template has a line down the middle, which you line up with the side of the ship base. So to initiate the barrel roll, you have to line that up, and then on the other side, you align the hash on the side of the base to either the front, middle, or back of the template. So you only have 6 positions instead of infinite. So that helps it feel a little bit more like Boost, which has the 3 fixed positions. You have essentially the 3 fixed positions on both sides.
And we played around with a bunch of versions of this, and we found this one was a good mix of flexibility and feeling like you didn't have just sort of that infinite preponderance of choice where sometimes you try to get to the exact perfect angle. It's like, all right, you have 3 options.
Hopefully
pick
one
the
of those
best.
works.
And 95% of the time, one of them works as well as it would have before.
Yeah.
And occasionally it means, you know, you had to plan a little better.
Yeah, it used to be that you could like perfectly fit in between 2 ships, and we didn't like the idea that a pilot could that perfectly, precisely not hit other ships and like be able to do that. So to try to play up the idea that you don't have this perfect flexibility, you're making spontaneous, instantaneous decisions, we wanted to make it a little more difficult to barrel. So another change we made was the way that the dial is portrayed. So
and
first
this
edition,
looks more substantial than it actually is. When you first see it, you're like, whoa, that dial's completely different. But actually, it's pretty similar. It's just constructed a little differently.
Yeah, so in first edition, you had the sort of mask, and then you could see the spaces behind it. But these are actually based on similar to the plastic dials that we created, where the aiming is on the outside and you have the whole face visible. So the dial on the interior is actually the same size as it was. So the old deluxe dials still function with the new second edition ones, but the back side, I guess, the front, whatever, the other face is behind it instead, and so it'll point down at your maneuver instead of blocking the other ones. So it allows you to view all your options available, show your opponent a lot easier. They don't have to cycle through it. They can just sort of view it a lot easier. So yeah, we were also able to put the name of the ship on the back, since you're not actually revealing all of the dial on the back, so there's only a small portion visible, so it would be difficult to impossible for anyone to really be able to read the back of your dial to know what you did. But
yeah, that was one of those things where we definitely had to do a bunch of component testing to make sure that was okay, and we were worried initially, like, is it going to make it too easy to see where dials are? And no, it's fine.
So yeah, we really liked how that turned out.
So probably the biggest change in the way competitive X-Wing functions in 2nd edition, aside from all the mechanical changes, the biggest change is that points are going to be handled through an app. I'm going to let Frank speak to that.
So we've been working really hard in order to create an experience where you can choose your game mode as one of the first options. So you have the standard format where you are able to play with all of the ships that were released for 2nd edition. And so if you go into that version, it limits your options in a certain capacity. But with our app, we're able to present you with more options how to play. So one of the big ones is with organized play. They're going to have their own separate tab that you can go down, and they can create some interesting events that are very restricted. So it could be there's only like 4 ships you can choose from if you chose a specific faction, or it will restrict which upgrades you have available to, or something like that. You know, they can manufacture a very specific play environment because they can add or remove.
Format.
Yeah, they can add or remove very specific cards in it in order to craft that play space.
And speaking of the play environment, one of the other things this means too, because the points will all be digital, is the points are not printed on the cards, neither are the upgrade bars, and they can be dynamically updated. So, you know, we've done a lot of testing of 2nd edition. We feel pretty confident about the points costs, but at the end of the day, one of the major issues of 1st edition was just the matter of accretion. You know, you quadruple the content in a game, and you're going to find that some of the content doesn't keep up as well. This way, we can dynamically adjust that as needed. So, you know, suddenly, we have a huge tournament, and we can say, oh, that's a really valuable data point. We can actually act on that instead of getting our, biggest data sets after we had to log everything in already.
Yeah.
So this way, we can keep the game fresh. You know, no build will be dominant forever. Iconic builds can stay relevant and be brought up to speed with the ability to change upgrade bars. If there are certain combinations that are just a real problem at any points cost, they can be shuffled around or removed. Or if we find out about a new ship capacity, they reveal some cool new feature on something, we can just add that. So it gives us a lot of flexibility from a design standpoint, and it helps us really bring the most authentic and fun experience to the players. So should you keep your X-Wing collection? Yes. Definitely keep your X-Wing collection. All of your plastic is going to be force compatible. Now, there are some cases where there's some cool new features in the new versions of the ships.
Or remolds.
Or updates to the paint scheme. But all the old stuff is still good. You can fly all your old ships.
Even the ships that are getting medium bases.
Yes.
So those, there's going to be a converter peg that will make it go from large to small to be able to fit your ARC 170 or what have you on the base. So all of those ships will be forward compatible, I guess, back compatible.
Yes. And to this end, we have the conversion kits.
Yeah, so there'll be conversion kits for each faction. They will incorporate all of the cards that were in 1st edition that we want to bring into 2nd edition. So some of the ships, like the TIE Interceptor, the X-Wing, had more pilots than we need to transfer over. So we cut a few of those pilots, but for other ones we were able to add a few new pilots, or if in books, comics, movies, whatever, we have more people flying things, we can put more famous people into those. So there were a couple instances where we actually gave you a pilot that wasn't in 1st edition, but for the most part, the conversion kit will give you everything that you had from 1st edition. When new product comes out, you will be able to, there will be some new pilots in there as well. Those will be available separately, so you don't necessarily, if you already own 15 of a ship, you don't have to buy another one in order for you to access the cards in it as well. So that is a pretty important point for people are able to continue using their old products. You don't have to buy, outside of the core set, you don't have to buy new ships in order to play with them.
So people's beautiful, painstaking repaints, still good, still use them.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So one of the most recognizable ones immediately is the graphic design has changed. So it is updated to be a little more of a line art aesthetic. Instead of...
Frank wore that shirt on purpose.
I did. Yeah, so the aesthetic has changed. Not that the previous one was bad, but we've gone in a new different direction with that. The other fundamental change you'll notice is that the action bar and stat line have switched positions a little bit. The action bar is listed vertically on the side to account for linked actions, so they will read left to right and top down.
We actually initially played around with linked actions linking down, and we found that for whatever reason, people much more intuitively read linked actions linking
left to
right.
So yeah, we did try some other options. We basically did all the possible ones above the stats, above those, and yeah, we found this one is the best one. Another subtle change is like if there were shield value on a ship and it didn't actually have shields, it just doesn't have that. So it only has the attack, agility, and hull value. Another big one is for ships that actually have front and rear arcs. Those are printed as separate values. So for example, for the fire spray, you have the front attack with attack of 3 and a rear attack with attack of 3. So for some ships, we're able to actually make those numbers different. So for your Lambda class shuttle with its smaller anti-personnel gun.
So the Lambda has a rear arc attack now.
Also has a rear arc attack. It's able to be less than 3 because obviously the rear gun is not quite as potent as the front guns. So that's pretty important. So ships that have a primary turret, you can have primary turret and a front. You could even have like a bullseye attack if you wanted, whatever you want. So there's lots of different options available with those different attack values in the front. They'll also have the charges if the pilot ability, for example, references charges, or force points for that if they're a force user. The other big change is ship abilities, which are printed beneath pilot abilities, or flavor text if they have flavor text. These are really great because they expand our ability to have specific abilities we want a ship to always be doing. So the best example is the TIE Striker. Because adaptive ailerons is a really cool effect, but we had to also design the dial and everything to try to account for you not doing that, and so it was hard to work with. I think we did a fine job with the first edition, but at the same time, I think having it be a forced action like that really makes us able to play with things, especially if it's something you didn't necessarily want to be doing, or whatever. We didn't have to have it cost points; it's just baked in.
It also is a classic case of something we were sort of already doing in first edition because it was a good idea and we liked it, but in second edition we get this chance to really integrate it from the start. So, not every ship has a ship ability. We wanted to keep a lot of chassis simple, but a number do, and it lets us reduce the number of upgrade cards on the table.
Yeah, so the card that you're always taking on there, you don't have to always take because it's already there. A TIE Fighter stays simple. They don't have one, but like a TIE Interceptor, which normally you would put stuff on there, already has an ability on there that's reminiscent to Push the Limit. It allowing you to do multiple actions, but it is just baked in, so you don't have to worry about having more cards.
And suddenly, also, the talent slot is not the Push the Limit slot on the TIE Interceptor.
Yes.
You can put whatever talent you want on your TIE Interceptor.
You could actually outmaneuver with it. Shocker. Yeah. The other interesting new slot we added was the configuration, card type. So in the first edition, we only had so many slots to work with, especially with the printed ones.
We can only physically fit so many.
You can only fit so many.
Even Slave 1 is practically the limit, wasn't it?
I think the Punisher and the K-Wing both were at max. But so we added the modification in the title at a later point in the game, but that's only so much design space to play with, because thematically the title represents something like the Millennium Falcon or the Slave One or a very specific ship. And a modification is the kind of slot that the pilot made this one tweak, and they could maybe take it off or whatever, upgrade in a different way. But we wanted to be able to play with that space of like, this ship has a certain feature available to it. So
like the S-foils on the X-Wing.
There you go. Where we might have to use something like the title slot, or make it a mod and give you another mod or something like that. To make it a lot simpler to work with, we gave ourselves this other space, the configuration. So we're using this to do things that are specific to that certain ship. So, for example, the S-foils on the X-Wing is a configuration. And so, I guess we didn't even mention this earlier, but upgrade cards in general aren't going to be mini cards anymore. They're actually going to be LCG sized. So because of the way it's presented, all of the upgrade icon and any restrictions on accessing it are printed on the left, and all of the valuable information and the art are on the right. So,
except for configs.
Except for configs.
Sure,
which is why
we'll get to that in a minute.
We got to that, yes. So you'll have your ship card and then your other cards laying behind it, which I was hesitant at first, because we brought it up and I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. But actually playing with it...
It was a Minnesota interesting.
It was a Minnesota interesting. That's interesting. But it actually...
That's different.
That's different. It actually worked itself out, though.
Yes.
Because having it work that way means they kind of hold themselves together. So your cards don't like kind of wander around. They're just sort of fixed in position.
So you basically end up with the same amount of table space covered. You just slot it under the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
The config slots in on the left, though, because some configs, like the S-foils, are going to flip. And we didn't want you to have to pull apart the whole pile,
or have to
flip
put
the card,
it on the top
put it back
or
at the
whatever.
end. So now that one goes on the other side.
Yeah.
And that's how you have that.
Yeah. So yeah, configs on the left, everything else on the right. The dice have not changed. The dice are the same as they ever were. So if you want some really sweet ones from first edition, you can keep using them.
Dice are the same. We talked about whether we want to change the dice or not, and it was a short conversation. Dice are pretty much good, so. You can use your old set. You may want a set of the new ones, though, and I think you'll need it for tournaments. But you can still use the old ones for a lot of things. The big advantage of the new ones is that they have a line printed down the middle. And so that lets you more easily resolve collisions and things like that. It's also necessary for barrel rolling and similar. But if you have an old set, you can still bust them out and play the game with them. You're just going to want the new ones on hand for resolving certain things.
Yeah, the one little comment about the one-speed maneuver template specifically, it has the line down the middle like normal, but it also has some hash marks on the other side, because when you barrel roll with a medium or large ship, you have to use the template the other way. So you actually use those lines for that.
Yes,
so the
large ship barrel rolling, Frank's favorite topic.
Well, again, I think it was helpful with that. We were able to restrict its ability to, it's not as infinitely repositionable. Also, by not having, having things like engine upgrade not be a card that you can just give anyone boost, we're able to restrict large ship boost immensely in that.
Engine upgrade still is a card for point of clarity.
Yes.
What it does is it takes your red boost and it makes it a standard action that doesn't require stress. So it doesn't suddenly make some ship that couldn't boost before able to boost, but it does, you know, significantly improve your ability to boost if you have it. Another change that, again, looks significant, is significant but isn't as scary as it looks, is formerly pilot skill, now initiative, because we felt that term reflected what it was actually reflecting, which is it's not really your skill as a pilot. Hera's a great pilot, but she's not a 9, for balance reasons and also because we don't want everyone to have to be a 9. But, you know, she's as good a pilot as you can get it without being a force user, really. So now it's initiative. It's sort of your speed on the, speed on the stick, but it's not necessarily your, like pilot skill. That's reflected by lots of things. So initiative is a compressed set of values. It only goes 1 to 6 for printed values. And now there are ways to get above or below that in various ways, but there's no veteran instincts. You can't actually modify it in any direct way, though permanently. It's a compressed set of values. And that was something we spent a lot of time on, because that was a pretty big change.
Yeah, since it was so fundamental to the game, that was like one of the first things we tested. We basically took the existing game as like, what if we compressed it? How different does it really feel? And it helped a lot because there were these sort of abandoned pilot skills, like 5 and 7. That
In
were,
certain factions, too.
In certain factions, where you just didn't want to do it because you'd be flying alone, as far as like you didn't have any other ships at that same pilot skill, because then you couldn't choose the order in which they activate. You were paying a lot to get up there, but then you wouldn't beat anyone, so you might as well have been a 2 or whatever. So compressing it, actually, we found, has assisted those complaints, because a lot of ships, you have a lot more generic guys that are at the same pilot skill as named guys. So you'll have some 3s, and I think there's a couple 4 generics that you're able to fly some more people at the same pilot skill, basically. Because that's a very useful skill to be able to do. But you still can have your bumpers, your low pilot skill guys that go first, and of course you still have your aces that can move last and shoot first.
Yeah, and Initiative 6 is pretty rare. We wanted to keep it as something that was fairly restricted, and there are not that many people who get to it. So.
Yeah, much like the 9s of yesteryear.
Yeah, but it's interesting because 6 would really be the equivalent of like 8 and 9, but we really only the 9s got to be 6. So
Mm-hmm.
it is the Darth Vaders and Fenrows and Wedge Antilles of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Antilli.
Antilli. Probably Antilli. Temporarily, much like there were in first edition, you can temporarily go above.
There's a force power that lets you shoot early.
Yeah, so there will be ways to like get past that, but it's not going to be a like 1 card, I'm just better.
Yeah, there's no permanent +1 to your initiative or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, so any given ordnance has a number of charges. Frequently 2, but some have 1. Advanced proton torpedoes are 1, and a few have 3. Actually, I think we might even have a 4 or 2.
I think there was 1 at least.
So yeah, there's a range of values. It can sort of be as much as you need. I mean, it gets unwieldy if it's more than like 6, but so you have those charges, and charges and shields. When you spend them, you flip them over. You're not actually moving them back and forth between the supply all the time. They have an active side, a readied side, and
active and inactive.
Active and inactive. There we go. So you have your ordnance. You line up your shot. You spend your charge. Most ordnance does not require spending a target lock or focus or whatever anymore.
It might still require that you have it, but you don't need to spend it.
Generally, speaking of slot theme, torpedoes tend to require target lock, although some might not. Missiles tend to require focus, although some might not. Then there are some ways around that, like force powers. They'll let you just fire from the hip.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the other another minor one is the adjustment to applying range combat bonuses or not. So in first edition, all secondary weapons did not apply the range combat bonus, and in second edition, there's an icon that represents don't apply combat bonuses.
It's a little ordnance thing. Missile or torpedo, conveniently.
Conveniently. So your cannons and turrets and such, which are fixed guns that shoot forwards, function much like your normal guns, which are fixed guns that shoot. So you will get extra dice at close range, and the defender gets additional die at further range. So so we were able to just be able to denote that with an icon instead of having you to remember that it's always on or whatever. So that's another little design space we gave ourselves.
Quality of life improvement.
Quality of life improvement. Another one is we actually have the fronted firing arc of the missile printed on the card. So we could give you a missile that shoots backwards or sideways or in your bullseye or anything like that.
In fact, we have at least one that shoots in your bullseye.
Mm-hmm.
Well, proton rockets.
So yeah, we were able to expand a little bit in how they're delivered.
Yeah, what's happening with the factions? Big question. Well, the biggest change is that the Resistance and First Order are being kicked out of the nest. They are going to become their own factions, and they're not going to become their own factions immediately. So they are their own factions immediately, but they are not going to receive conversion kits immediately, but they will very soon. So that's one big change, is that unfortunately, Kylo and Vader will only be able to fly together in casual games or in Kylo's dreams. So just like the movies.
Yeah.
So the Resistance of the First Order will be their own factions. They're going to have their own identities. They will feel similar to the Rebellion and the Empire, of course, in certain ways, but they are going to have more of their own stuff going on. So the 3 starting factions are the Rebel Alliance, the Galactic Empire, and Scum and Villainy. And they are, I'd say we're refining them rather than revolutionizing any of them. We're taking a lot of the ideas that we had in first edition and we're really focusing in on them. Mm-hmm. So, if you want to speak to a little bit of that.
Sure. So, as we spoke previously, we really liked certain mechanics that the ships provided for their faction and wanted to play that up higher, or at the very least highlight that as a thing that they like to do. So, having the Empire be uniform, flying together, doing stuff at the same time together, is a feature that we want to represent in other pilot abilities or Imperial-specific upgrade cards. While the Rebels are all about helping each other, being friends, Biggs Darklighter being a very important, influential character in first edition's meta throughout most of the game. We liked that idea a lot and tried to have abilities that have to do with difficulty in target prioritization, as well as doing stuff to help one specific friend. So you help him do the thing, he'll help you back, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and Rebels tend to have abilities that'll sort of give up a benefit to help someone else, or help someone else after they do something. They tend to be, like one hero helping one other hero, or one pilot helping one other pilot, whereas the Empire tends to have more sort of area buffs. And then Scum is really...
Contrastly,
yes,
the Scum are willing to screw over their friends in order to get far themselves.
Scum probably had the strongest faction theme in first edition because they were introduced after the fact, after Rebels and Empire had sort of crystallized, and so we could say what is Scum. But they're a little bit more tightened in from first edition as well. There's definitely more screwing over your teammates. Everybody's favorite team kill bot is back.
More ways for you to, what was I going to say? More ways for you to actually have an ability that is sometimes a drawback, because it's always on.
Yes.
Which is, I think, a fun place to play with design space. Because you can have a fact that's
over-tuning their ships on purpose.
Right.
And then paying the consequences later.
Right. Where you're like, oh, this is great. Oh, all the time. Oh, maybe I don't want this all the time. So that's a fun one. I like those effects.
And then, yeah, the motley bounty hunters are back. And so, we tried to do a lot of character theme stuff as well. So, Zuckuss and Florlam fly well together. Tried to really, play up the iconic character pairs. Luke and Han and Chewie, all those. So there's a fair amount of stuff that plays in with that.
Speaking of Resistance First Order, we tried to do more work to make them feel more separate than their related factions. So although the First Order and the Imperials are both very regimented and uniform and organized, First Order is to the nth degree that case. So they're much more willing to make sure everyone does the same thing, which is beneficial, but it might be pretty harsh.
They also have a bit more of a fanaticism angle played up in them. The Empire has some stuff that lets them, some ruthless tactics, some things that let them, throw someone under the bus. But the First Order really hits that home, and pushes a lot on that.
The Resistance, on the other hand, although they're obviously working together, they're friends and whatnot, is played up by the fact that they quickly diminished in size. And everyone has to be really important. And everyone is important. So a lot of the abilities for the Resistance pilots tend to be much more like, I'm really awesome. That kind of plays
I'm not going to say show off was our keyword for designing, Poe Dameron, but it was on the list.
Yeah.
And I don't think he'll disappoint.
Yes, you will like his effect. But yeah, the Resistance in general plays up more of, I'm really awesome. It does a bit of helping out their friends, but to a lesser degree.
There are a lot of abilities that get benefits for having friends around. That's one of the distinctions between them and the Rebels. The Rebels tend to help friends who are nearby. The Resistance tends to get a benefit from being near friends. So, you know, abilities, Jessica Pavo was one of our inspirations there, where her ability, you know, was really one of the ones we were looking at. And
So this feels different.
This feels
than
really
others.
resistance-y and interesting, and it feels like you're part of a team, but it's a team that plays a little differently and sort of pushes its star players to the front.
Yeah, so we feel like the factions have more distinction this time around.
If you don't want to go on the app, you don't want to get into that, you just want to throw down a quick game on the table with your friends, or you want to teach someone how to play, or you just, you know, kind of want to play a game with some creative restrictions. We have quick build cards, and you get one of these, you get a quick build for each pilot. Sometimes there are multiple on a card, and it has a threat level listed. And threat level is 1 through 5, and they're color-coded, and that is basically a rough estimate of how dangerous this build is. And it'll have some pre-selected upgrades. It'll have, and so you can just basically, and those upgrades are in the core set or in that product or whatever, so you can just quickly put that on the table. You know, like, we really wanted people to just be able to get to the game. You know, you want to get to the game immediately. You say, okay, we're playing a threat level 5 game. You know,
I want to fly, you know, this guy I just read about in a book, you know. I heard he's a thing and he's in this game, so okay.
Thane Kyrell.
Thane Kyrell, great. Oh, he's an X-Wing pilot, cool. I'm gonna fly, put him down, and you get the cards. And as Max said, you have the cards. If it's listed on there, it's either in the core set or the product you bought him in. So it doesn't require you to go out of your way to go find it somewhere else. You have it already.
And yeah, so you match your threat levels, you play a game. It's obviously not tournament tuned, and it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be for casual games. It's supposed to be for, you could do cool alternate format stuff with it. We've talked about doing like drafts where you have to draft quick build cards, and that's sort of, that could be a fun way to play the game. And it's good for just, you know, like teaching people and like, oh yeah, let's have Luke and Han fly against a whole bunch of TIE fighters, just a whole mess of them, because they're threat level 1. So, you know, those Academy pilots, then, you know, that would be a pretty decent game. Again, you know, not razor honed to the, you know, tournament level, but certainly playable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of game size, inflation has set in. We're moving to a 200-point scale. It's still essentially a 100-point scale. We just found that half points were an extremely valuable thing to have, and half points are confusing. So, 200 points. It's still the 100-point game, you know, and love, but I guess it's 206 now. In terms of epic play, I don't know if we can say much, but
It will be around.
we really like epic. And we look forward to doing more with it.
So part of the app, one of the options available is the organized play events. So they will be able to host events that basically break the rules, add new win conditions, whatever we want to do. It's pretty open. So it could make very specific requirements for certain players, or be able to more or less create, you know, just completely different environments. You could have a 3v1 format where the one player gets more stuff or more abilities, and then you have multiple players that work together. We have a lot more opportunity to be able to create new ways for the players to play the game with each other.
In terms of alternate playstyles, one is in the core set.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, related to the quick build cards that we previously mentioned, there's a concept of escalation with the quick build cards, where you're going to fly out with your Academy TIE, threat level 1, and he gets smoked, because it's going to happen. And you get to replace him with a guy that's threat level 2 instead. So progressively getting stronger and stronger. So he gets destroyed, you replace him with a 3, that sort of thing. So you're able to create this interesting back and forth as far as, and also you don't have to have pre-built every step along the way. It's pretty quick, easy to build. You have all the cards, the threat levels right there.
There's a new waypoint token, or
yep.
I don't remember what it's called.
Hyperspace marker.
There's a new token. It's a little 3-sided token, and you can deploy ships off of it, essentially. It's got an ending like a maneuver tool. Mm-hmm. So that way you don't always have to deploy in the same place. Your opponent can't just sit there and wait for you to show up. You can deploy in a couple different positions.
Yeah, rather than entering from a board edge, you enter in from one of these little points in the middle of the map, which can create some really dynamic gameplay environments.
So your Academy TIE gets blown up, and then your Black Squadron TIE drops in behind the enemy, and suddenly you have the advantage. So that's just one, alternate play mode that's right there in the core set. But it's certainly something we're interested in. I know OP is interested in.
Favorite chips, go.
Favorite chips.
Favorite chip, just top.
Favorite chip. I mean, flying the Interceptor is always a blast, because who doesn't like to boost barrel and get out of arcs?
I'm gonna go with the X-Wing. I really like flying the X-Wing in second edition.
Yeah.
We were able to
Wait,
take
the 65 or the 70?
I mean, both.
65.
Both are great.
I like both a lot.
But
And
65 is...
65 is a lot of fun to fly in second edition.
I would rate it most improved.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a really fun ship to fly. So the S-foils give you a little bit of dynamism if you're flying with those. You'll often want to, though you might not sometimes. But just the ability to, like, snap your S-foil shut and zoom through some rocks and then open them up and attack. It's very cinematic. It's very, iconic to that. And, people have had a little taste of that in first edition.
I know what my answer is now.
Uh-oh.
Can't tell you.
Oh.
I'm having too much fun with it, but it's unfortunately an unreleased ship. We haven't played a lot of games lately in it, and it's great.
Okay.
So the future's looking bright.
Yeah. But yeah, the T-65 X-Wing, I think, for me. I really like flying the T-65 these days. Also, ordnance being stronger helps a lot, too.
Yeah.
Because suddenly it's like, oh, that torpedo slot is a really nice thing to have. And it's not quite so much, like all or nothing. It's got a little more variance to it. Also, Luke is just a lot of fun to fly because force points are awesome.
Yeah, force users are a blast.
But there's definitely a lot of room for those non-force users too. And in a lot of cases, force users don't get the highest initiative. Vader's a little bit of an exception because he's Darth Vader. But, Luke is only a 5. You want to go for initiative 6, you got to take Wedge. I mean, you want both, you just take both. But.
Cool. Yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks a ton. This has been really informative.
Yeah, well, good. And we're going to be a demo tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Cool.
I'll be here tomorrow.
Great.
Sure.
Click to subscribe. Support us on Patreon. Check out more videos. And thanks for watching.